Good evening, night owls, and welcome to Whisper Crowley. Tonight, I will guide you into a world of darkness, hoping to help you relax and unwind. Perhaps some of you will even drift into a haunting yet soothing sleep. Before we begin, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. And now, we begin. This happened about a year ago. I'm a male, a big guy, an ex-rugby player in my late 20s, and I live in a nice neighborhood in Oregon. Needless to say, I don't have much to fear at night. I had 2 housemates living with me at the time, so there always seemed to be someone home with me at night. I got home late from a business trip around midnight, entered the house exhausted, and dropped everything before going to bed. I'm a heavy sleeper, so it takes something loud to wake me. Then around 3:00 a.m., I heard loud, aggressive knocking on my door. It sounded like someone was trying to kick my door down. I had never heard anything like it before. Though it was a Saturday, I figured my housemates had gone out to the bars and forgotten their keys. Begrudgingly, I stumbled out of bed, walked down the hallway in the dark, and noticed all the bedroom doors were open with no housemates to be found. They must be messing with me, I thought. I arrived at my front door and looked through the peephole to see a young woman who appeared homeless, but was actually quite attractive. She wore an oversized hoodie with jeans and a beanie, mind you. This is Oregon in the middle of summer. It had to be 85 degrees at that time, which was odd. She seemed frantic, almost like she was being chased. I was just going to open the door and make sure she was okay. But then she started laughing, a disturbing laugh that stopped me in my tracks. She proceeded to yell, "I need to use your bathroom. Let me in," over and over for a good 5 minutes. I just stood behind the door in silence, watching her through the peephole. I wasn't scared at that moment. I was annoyed and about to yell at her to leave. Then, all of a sudden, she turned and skipped down my driveway like a child. I thought to myself, this girl is acting strangely, and went back to bed. 30 minutes later, I was just about to fall back asleep when that same aggressive knocking happened again. I was furious at this point, about to run out there, open the door, and give this woman a piece of my mind. But I looked through the peephole first, and it was a man. He was dressed in practically the same outfit as the woman, a scrawny-looking male, not physically imposing by any means, but he looked just as strange as she did. I could see her behind the guy, jumping up and down, laughing. He looked into the peephole, yelling, "Yo, my girl has to pee. Let us in." Now I was a little freaked out, not going to lie. I had seen scenarios like this in horror movies. So I backed away from the door, went to the kitchen, grabbed a knife, went back to my room and sat in my closet. I figured if they broke in, at least they wouldn't see me at first, and I could launch a counterattack. 2 hours passed with no more noises, and I fell asleep in my closet with the knife in hand. Then I heard tapping on my bedroom window, which startled me awake. My bedroom is on the first floor and accessible from the backyard. The lights were off, so I crept over to the window and slowly pushed aside one of the blinds. It was the woman peering into my bedroom, but not looking directly at me, just subtly tapping the window. Off in the distance was the guy, completely naked, doing cannonballs into my pool. I instinctively, without thinking, yelled, "Hey, get out of my pool." This brought her attention straight to me. We made eye contact inches away from each other through the glass. She had the most disturbing smile and started giggling. That freaked me out completely. I instantly called the police, telling them some clearly intoxicated individuals were in my backyard, and I feared for my life. I went into my bathroom, locked the door, and waited for the inevitable confrontation. The dispatcher informed me the police had arrived, but found no one outside the house. They must have run off into the alley when the cops showed up. The next day, I saw neighborhood watch flyers informing us that over the past 3 nights, 6 homes had been broken into, 4 dogs had been brutally harmed, and to keep an eye out for any strange people in the neighborhood. The hairs on my neck stood straight up, but I never saw those 2 individuals again. I installed an alarm system, got a handgun, and I sleep great now. But that look on that woman's face still haunts me. I hope you enjoyed the first story. If you did, don't forget to leave a like. But if I didn't do my job well, feel free to give it a thumbs down. Either way, drop a comment and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, let's continue. Moving to a better neighborhood turned into a nightmare. Last year, my fiancé and my father passed away, one right after the other. After they died, I obviously fell into a deep depression. Although I thought I was pulling off the whole "I'm fine" thing, my friends could clearly see through it. A close friend practically demanded that I move in with her and get out of the apartment I had shared with my fiancé for 10 years. She wanted me to start fresh, and while I didn't think I was ready to move on, the idea of not living alone was appealing. Plus, her apartment was in a much nicer neighborhood than the one I was living in, so I agreed. Living with her has been fantastic. Our schedules are opposite, me on days, her on nights. So we both get alone time, but also have at least one day off together each week to hang out. Moving also allowed me to walk to work, since it's so close. I thought that would be a godsend, until my 10-minute walk turned into a 2-month-long nightmare. One evening after work, I decided to sit in the park between my apartment and my job. As I was sitting there, a man approached me. I noticed his face first. He was almost handsome, though a little rough-looking. Even though I live in an urban area with a high homeless population, it didn't occur to me that this man might be anything other than a mildly handsome 40-something guy. So I smiled and looked back down at my phone, expecting him to walk by. Nope. He asked me what time it was, and when I looked up to tell him, I noticed all the things he was carrying. It was such a random assortment. A child's chalkboard with nonsense scribbled all over it, a paper bag full of old magazines and paperwork, and a metal shelf that looked like it once held DVDs. I then noticed he wasn't wearing shoes, and his hands were filthy. It finally dawned on me that this was not going to be a normal encounter. From the parts of his rambling I could follow, he told me he'd just been released from prison and was looking for a tattoo shop because he wanted to forget the DOJ. And 27. The number of Department of Justice violations he had while in prison tattooed on him, and he wanted the DOJ to pay for it. Then he noticed a button on my bag with the logo for a local bar. He told me he had gone there one night and went home with someone. Then he looked me up and down and said, "But young ladies are my problem." I gathered my things and left immediately. I love my apartment, but it has its drawbacks, which became glaringly obvious after this encounter. It's on the first floor, and I used to love it because you can walk out through the sliding glass doors, one in the living room and one in my bedroom, onto an awesome gated patio with tables and grills for barbecuing. It's great in the summer. Now I hate it because it's right on the street, and the fencing is clearly very easy to scale. One very early morning, around 5:00 a.m., I heard a man scream, "What the hell are you doing?" So loudly and so close that it woke me from a dead sleep. I genuinely thought it was coming from inside my bedroom. As it turned out, it was coming from outside. A neighbor had been leaving for work and found the man from the park sleeping against my sliding glass door. The guy got scared off. My neighbor checked on me, and once I calmed down, I chalked it up to a messed up coincidence. 2 weeks later, I was sleeping, and at some point, this man came onto the patio and started tapping on my sliding glass door. I honestly just lay there frozen with fear until he escalated to full-blown kicking the glass. I turned on the light to grab my phone, and he took off. I called the police, who came to take a report and review footage from the building's cameras. The footage confirmed it was the man from the park, and more disturbingly, footage from the hallway cameras showed that on more than one occasion, he had slipped into the building behind a resident and sat in the lobby for several hours. At one point, he even walked down the hallway, trying both my doorknob and my neighbor's doorknob to see if they were unlocked. He even went so far as to hide in a little mailbox room when he saw my roommate coming in from work. The police think he either followed me from the park or just happened to notice me at some point while I was on the patio. It's been a few weeks, and I haven't seen him. No one has reported seeing him around the building either. My roommate bought me pepper spray, and my slightly kooky but well-meaning neighbor, who has made it very clear that he's retired military and quite security conscious, checks on me nightly. So I'm not as freaked out as I could be, but still. To the creepy man from the park, here's hoping our paths never cross again. I was watching my daughter's kids while she and her husband went out of town. They have a teenage daughter, let's call her Zoe. Around 3:00 a.m., I was woken up by a weird rustling sound. I looked out the window and saw movement. A boy emerged from the bushes on the side of the house. I noticed a bike tossed on the lawn that definitely wasn't ours. My first thought was that it was a burglar casing houses, but since he looked young and arrived on a bike, I figured scaring him straight would be enough for him to decide to head home. I didn't want to ruin a teenager's life by calling the cops right away. So I went out on the porch, flipped the lights on, and said, "Can I help you?" in my classroom voice. The guy looked surprised, but not nervous. He was wearing a Letterman-style jacket, but once I got a clear view of him in the street lights, he seemed much older than my granddaughter, gruff, and more wiry than athletic. He walked closer to the house and said, "Yeah, I'm looking for Zoe." I gave him a disapproving glare, hoping he'd realize he'd come looking for a girl late at night, and an upset grandmother had answered instead. It was time to split. I thought that maybe Zoe knew her parents were going out of town, and before she knew I'd be staying over, she told a secret older boyfriend to come over. It was late, and I was alone with several kids, so I didn't want him coming any closer to the house. I also thought it was strange he came so late, and wanted to be sure Zoe actually wanted to talk to him. So I said, "I'm sorry, who?" He replied, "Zoe. You know Zoe Parker. This is her house." I thought if he knew her full name, they must at least be friends. I said, "You wait there." He started to walk up, and I felt a sick burning in my gut. Instinct kicked in. I yelled, "No, stop." Then I readjusted and said, "You stay right there. This is private property. Don't take a step closer. Wait there." I went in, and Zoe was asleep in a room just one window over from where the rustling first occurred. I woke her up and said something to the effect of, "I don't know what the big idea is to have friends over at this time of night, but you tell them to go home." She had no clue what I was talking about. I said, "There's a guy outside asking for you." Confused, she got up and went to the window. When she saw him, she went white as a sheet. "He asked for you." "Yes, by name. Call the police." I've never seen him in my life. I called 911 immediately, but as I was on the phone with them, Zoe started tugging at my arm. "He's coming up." I had younger kids in the house to think about, so I kept the door latched and pulled it open just enough for the latch. I yelled, "I asked my granddaughter, and none of us know a Zoe Parker. Leave my property, or I'm calling 911. He got angry and started yelling for her to come out. Thankfully, the police arrived pretty quickly, and when he heard the sirens, he grabbed the bike and ran off. I watched where he was running, and he jumped into the passenger side of a car without headlights or front plates and sped away. The police followed in the same direction once I pointed them out, but they didn't catch him. They advised us to take all her social media details offline if she was sure she didn't know this person, and mentioned they had a couple of similar reports recently and were looking into it. I got a heavy-duty lock, and she slept in my room for the remainder of my stay. Last night, I was at a classmate's house, working on a group project due tomorrow. I live in an apartment in the town where our university is located, and my classmate lives at his parents' house in the hills, just outside of town. To get to the house, you have to drive along a relatively secluded and narrow 2-lane road for about 5 to 6 miles. We started working on the project at about 6:00 p.m., and I ended up hanging around for a while after we finished. I left his house pretty late, around 11:00 p.m., and started down the road back toward town. I didn't realize how tough it would be to navigate the road at night. There were no street lights, and the road was unkempt and riddled with potholes. On top of this, I had no cell service, so I had to drive very slowly to make sure I didn't blow out one of my tires, since I had used my spare a couple of weeks back. I figured I was about 3 miles from the house when I rounded a tight corner and saw a pickup truck with a camper shell parked diagonally across the road. The way it was parked completely blocked my path, and I couldn't drive around it because there was a ditch on both sides of the road. The only way for me to go at this point was backward to where there was a pull-off I could use to turn my car around. At first, I couldn't see inside the cab, but when I turned on my high beams, I saw that there was a man slumped over in the driver's seat, his head resting against the steering wheel as if he had been knocked out after a bad accident. I immediately sensed something was wrong. The way his truck had just, coincidentally, come to rest in a position that totally blocked the road was a big red flag for me. I had heard stories of people playing dead in the road as a way to lure unsuspecting drivers out of their cars so they could rob them. I decided forget this and elected to go back to my classmate's house and explain what was going on. I threw the car into reverse, keeping my eyes darting back and forth between my rearview mirror and the truck. I looked and saw that I was almost to the pull-off where I could turn around. When I looked back, my heart skipped about 5 beats. The man who had been slumped over in the driver's seat was now walking toward my car at a hurried pace, while a few other men jumped out of the camper shell and started moving toward me as well. I panicked and accelerated backward into the pull-off, which scraped the undercarriage of my car pretty badly. As I put it into drive, the guy was already at my passenger side door, tugging on the handle, which, thank the Lord, was locked. I only caught a brief glimpse of him, but his face appeared to be scabbed and gaunt, definitely someone with substance abuse issues. I sped away and didn't slow down at all until I reached the house, constantly checking my rear view to see if they were following me. Thankfully, they didn't trail me, and when I reached the house, I explained what had happened to my classmate, and we called the cops. I was grateful that my buddy's parents were kind enough to let me stay the night. The police didn't find anyone on the road matching the description, but I filed an incident report, and they told me they would be on the lookout for similar vehicles and suspicious activity. I'm still so shaken up over it. I keep getting the same adrenaline rush I felt when I saw the guy charging at me whenever I think about it. I was a heavily pregnant woman when a man approached me and my kids in a deserted mall parking lot at 10 p.m. and started talking to my children. This happened about 5 years ago while I was 9 months pregnant. I was holiday shopping at the mall with my then 7 and 15-year-old daughters in a very safe city with a very low crime rate. There was a family restaurant connected to the mall, and we ended our shopping pretty late as the mall stores were starting to close. So I took my kids to the restaurant for a late dinner. We finished eating at about 10:00 p.m. and left through the restaurant entrance into the practically deserted parking lot with shopping bags in tow. As we got to the car, I was in the middle of maneuvering the shopping bags on my arms to find my keys when a man in his 50s, looking disheveled, started walking up from somewhere in the parking lot. He had shaggy gray-white hair, a faded plaid shirt, and old jeans. I noticed him briskly approaching when he was about 40 feet away, and he said, "This is a stick-up. Give me all your money." My blood ran cold, and I stared at him, speechless, shakingly saying, "What?" He then said he was just kidding and came up to stand right next to my daughters, who were on the other side of the car waiting for me to unlock it to let them in. He then started making small talk with me and my girls, asking if they were being good for Santa, how old they were, if we had finished our holiday shopping, what kind of things we had gotten, etc. He didn't seem intoxicated, under the influence, slow, or mentally challenged at all. He was very coherent and seemed of sound mind. Mind you, I was a heavily pregnant woman alone with my 2 daughters in a mostly deserted parking lot at 10:00 at night, being approached by a stranger who stood right next to my kids on the other side of the car, just shooting the breeze and talking to me and my kids with his hands in his pockets while occasionally looking over his shoulder. I didn't want to aggravate him, so I was politely conversing with him and trying to look calm and nonchalant while attempting to disguise my frantic hands, digging inside my giant purse for my car keys. This exchange went on for a couple of minutes, while he periodically kept looking over his shoulder. I was silently panicking and trying to politely keep the situation from escalating by calmly and nonchalantly talking to him, while also trying in vain to find my car keys to get us out of there. They were hiding really well. I felt that at any moment he was going to pull a knife or gun. My kids were right next to him, away from their mother on the other side of the car, and I couldn't find my car keys to get my kids into the safety of the car. He kept trying to engage them in conversation, and I could see that my oldest daughter was a little weirded out. She kept glancing at me to gauge my assessment and reaction to this situation. Kids often tend not to recognize potential danger when they are with their parents, since they see us as their protectors. Because he was only talking and acting friendly, and I was doing my best to stay calm, they were oblivious to the alarming situation we all were in. Being 9 months pregnant, I was no match for this full-grown man, especially if he was hiding a weapon. While still desperately digging for my keys, I tried to politely give him hints that the conversation was over by saying things like, "It was nice chatting with you, but I need to get these kids to bed. And it was nice meeting you," while telling my girls to say it was nice meeting him too. My polite attempts to get this guy to leave weren't working because he kept sidestepping my attempts and asking them what their favorite school subjects were and what nice young ladies they were, while I struggled with the shopping bags and continued digging in my giant cluttered purse for my car keys. My outgoing 7-year-old was completely oblivious to how not okay this situation was, because he was being friendly, and because of the whole "I'm with mommy, so I'm safe" child mentality. So she started to talk about what she picked out for Daddy for Christmas. She enthusiastically talked about kid stuff and asked him if he knew what Minecraft was, keeping this man engaged in conversation. They didn't realize that I was becoming desperate to get them the hell out of there. Then I suddenly felt a sinking feeling and dread when I realized I might have lost my keys in the mall. And then we were stuck outside with this strange man who kept looking over his shoulder and showed no signs of walking away. I was thinking that he was waiting for the perfect moment to pounce. All he had to do was grab one of my girls and threaten their lives, knowing it would make me do whatever he wanted as long as he wouldn't hurt them. I started to feel my adrenaline spike, and my heart and stomach started doing flip-flops. I felt like at any moment, things were going to go down as I realized there were no other people or witnesses around, and that we were totally alone with him. At that moment, the odds were stacked against us, and he had his chance. Then all of a sudden he said, "Okay, it was nice talking with you. See you later," and walked off in the same direction from which he came. It wasn't until then that I found my car keys, unlocked the car, and told my kids to get in fast. I got in, locked the doors, started the car, and drove the hell out of there. My 15-year-old lightheartedly and jokingly said, "Okay, that was weird," and laughed. I was overwhelmed with relief, and then confused over what had just happened. I thought to myself, why would a guy of seemingly sound mind think it was totally acceptable to go out of his way just to approach a woman and her kids in a deserted parking lot late at night just to chit-chat? But since nothing bad happened, I brushed it off and joked about it too. When we got home, my husband greeted us and asked how shopping went. I said it went well, and my 15-year-old told him what happened in the parking lot and how weird it was while joking about it. I started joking too, saying how I was mildly having a panic attack while trying to look calm. I made fun of myself by telling my husband how I was attempting to inconspicuously rummage through my purse to find my car keys. My husband went completely pale. I acknowledged his horrified look of alarm and assured him that although creepy, the guy was just talking and eventually left on his own. Now, my father-in-law is a retired police officer, and my husband went through police academy training after graduating high school. He decided to go to business school instead of becoming a cop. Given the knowledge he gained from that, plus growing up with a cop for a dad, I found out why my husband looked absolutely horrified when I told him the details. What my husband told me completely chilled me to the bone. My husband told me that he was 100% sure the reason why the guy was hanging around us and chit-chatting was that he was waiting for me to unlock my car. And the reason why he was standing next to our kids was that once I unlocked the car and the kids started to get inside, he was most likely going to force himself into the car with the kids and hold a knife or gun to them to gain leverage on me, forcing me to cooperate, knowing that I wouldn't abandon my kids. This would compel me to get into the car with him and do whatever he wanted me to do, which most likely would be to drive to a remote location to do God knows what. The fact that he wasn't wearing a mask suggested that his intentions were also to leave no witnesses to identify him. I then remembered that he was positioned by the back seat passenger door where my 7-year-old was standing, waiting to get in. My husband then told me that the most likely reason the guy ended up leaving was that it took so long for me to find my keys, and the longer it took, the more anxious and spooked it made him. That whole time I was desperate to find my car keys, which, through some sort of divine intervention, stayed hidden in my purse, thus saving us from potentially being abducted. My father was in the Army for 21 years, retired, and moved to a very small town in northern Michigan. He got bored after a couple of years, and even though we didn't need the money between his retirement and what my mom was making as a bookkeeper and tax preparer, he wanted to go back to work. He started working at various gas stations, and since it was a small town, the owners didn't mind if I came in to help him out with stocking the coolers or even running the register, as long as I didn't sell any beer or cigarettes. This all took place in the early 90s. The actual story I'm going to tell took place in 1990, and I remember the day well because it was shortly after my birthday. Being 15 in Michigan, I had just gotten my learner's permit, and my dad would let me drive him to and from work to get some experience on the road, both during the day and at night. I was sitting in my usual spot at a table set up along the windows, book in hand, feet propped up, with a soda on the table along with some snacks. I would generally spend most of the evening that way, reading books and getting up to run the register or stock the cooler at different times. I remember glancing up because something caught my attention that was unusual. I realized that a lady was walking up our parking lot from the direction of the interstate. The gas station was right on Interstate 75. This in itself was really strange because where we were located, you didn't get many people walking, and definitely not from the direction of the interstate. I figured she had broken down somewhere and was coming to use the phone to call for a tow truck or something. I was completely wrong. She came into the store, looked around for a few minutes, and I remember getting a strange and creepy feeling about her. She walked up to the counter and started telling my dad a story about how she had gotten stranded and needed a ride to the next big town north from us. Traverse City was the town. This is important. My dad let her know that he was working and that there was no way he could take her. She turned, looked at me, and while she was looking away from him, my dad caught my eye and suddenly shook his head no. I was confused for a second, but then she turned back to my dad and pointed at me, asking if I could take her. My dad responded that I only had a learner's permit and wouldn't be able to drive her anywhere, and then drive back. Normally, I would have done it even though it was illegal, because I had done it a few times before already. I didn't argue with my dad since this was completely out of character for him. He was usually chatty with the customers, but for whatever reason, he was almost curt and dismissive of her. Well, she cursed at him for a minute, and he basically told her to get out of the store. She slammed the door open. I thought the glass was going to break from how hard she had slammed it, and then she stomped out of the store and down the driveway. I kept an eye on her and continued to watch as she made her way back up to the interstate, and then started up the northbound on-ramp. Almost a year passed, and I was in my bedroom, less than a week before my 16th birthday. I heard my dad yelling from the living room, "Son, get in here and look at this." I quickly ran to the living room and saw my dad pointing at the TV. I looked at the mugshot of the lady on the screen and immediately remembered the woman who had been in the store. It turns out I almost gave a car ride to Aileen Wuornos, who was later convicted of being a serial murderer and then put to death. I still have nightmares about what could have happened. I was a 19-year-old female at the time, still female, of course, just a little older now. I love camping. Anytime my friends and I came home from college, we would load up our cooler with beer, grab some gear, and go hang out outside. Unfortunately, while I was actually at school, none of my sorority sisters or other friends ever wanted to go with me, so I would often suffer withdrawals from camping. One day, the weather was way too nice to waste, so I grabbed some of my gear, hopped in a car I borrowed from a buddy, and drove to a spot that was secluded, yet within a safe distance to civilization where I could run and get help. Camping also creeps me out sometimes, but that creepy feeling is somewhat of a plus for me. It's the same reason that people read these stories. It's fun to be scared. So I made a little camp and got a fire going. I hadn't brought all that much to eat, but I was enjoying myself, reading and looking around the area, that sort of thing. I got the feeling I was being watched and stopped dead in my tracks. I heard a twig crunch over to my right, and then saw a deer bolt from about 100 feet or so in front of me. I laughed at myself and went back to the camp with the armful of wood I had gathered. I kept freaking myself out, hearing sounds just outside of the ring of light cast by the fire. I always get inside my head, so I shrugged it off and kept whittling a stick I had been working on. Around 1:00 a.m., I decided to go into my tent and snuff out the lantern. I had been drinking beer in the most unladylike fashion and smoking cheap cigars. Another reason I like camping. I can act however I want. So I passed out relatively quickly. At about 2:00 a.m., I started hearing footsteps. They sounded pretty light and sort of timid. I thought to myself that it was a deer or another animal, more likely a raccoon, because I had probably left some food out. I was still on guard, though. After about 30 minutes of sleeping with one eye open, I heard a rubbing noise, and the tent fabric was being pushed in a bit. I don't know how I didn't soil my sleeping bag, but I just sat there, paralyzed, with my pocket knife in my hand. I desperately wanted to thrust the knife through the tent fabric, but I was still holding onto a hope that it was some of my buddies from the fraternity joking with me. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it all stopped. I was starting to feel slightly more secure because daylight would be coming in about 2 or 3 hours. But I sure as heck wasn't going to go to sleep. All of a sudden, at about 4:00 a.m., I realized I should put my boots on so that if anything did happen, I would be ready. After having stayed up and kept alert a little while longer, my friend's car alarm went blaring. I freaked out and ran out of the tent. I got about 2 steps before something grabbed me around the mouth. I opened my mouth to scream, but instead, the person's pinky finger slipped between my teeth. I've heard that people can perform superhuman feats when they have huge adrenaline rushes. In my case, I just clamped down, and there's no way to say this without sounding ridiculous. His finger popped off. He screamed and pulled his hand away, the missing digit falling to the ground. He took off running down the hill I was camping on, and I took off quickly in the opposite direction. I must have looked ridiculous to the people whose house I ran to. A little sorority girl in a tank top, boxers, and steel-toe boots. I also had some blood that had oozed out of my lip, not from the finger, but because I had also managed to take a pretty good chunk out of my lip as well. I told them what happened. They called the police, got me some real clothing, and the man at the house made me a whiskey and Coke. When the cops got there, they checked it out, and when they came back, it was light out. They brought me back so I could get my friend's car, and what I saw just made me more scared. Right next to the tent was a red gas can. He could have just lit me on fire earlier. The finger was also gone, suggesting he had come back. The kicker is they never caught the guy. So somewhere out there is a man sitting down to dinner, maybe alone, maybe with a wife and a couple of kids, and he's missing his right pinky. A few years back, I was out with my now husband and some friends at a bar on Main Street in St. Louis. I ran into some old friends from high school, and we decided to go down the street to another bar, since it wasn't the type of bar my other half would hang out in. He decided to go home and let me party with my friends. We had a good night. I had quite a few drinks, and my girlfriend said she'd give me a ride home at the end of the night. Come 2:00 a.m., when all the bars were letting out, I realized that her car would be packed with people, so I decided that I would walk, since it was only about a 15-minute walk, and there were people everywhere, which made me feel safe. I started walking, and as I crossed the street a few blocks down, I noticed that there was no longer anyone around. To be honest, I didn't live in the best neighborhood. A red hatchback car drove by me and slowed down as it passed. I didn't recognize the driver, an older male with glasses, but because he was staring at me, I thought maybe he thought I was someone else. A few seconds later, the car came back down the street the other way and slowed down again as he passed me, still staring. I knew it was the same car, since the rear right tail light was busted. After the second pass, I started to get a feeling in my gut that something wasn't right. I checked my pockets for keys, or something I could use to defend myself should the guy decide to stop the car and get out. But all I had was a pack of cigarettes and a lighter, since my boyfriend took the house keys when he left earlier that night. The same car passed me, now back the other way on my side of the road, a third time. This time he was almost stopped as he drove alongside me. But then he sped up and pulled into a parking lot up ahead. He parked with the car facing the sidewalk on the side I was walking on. Now the only thing going through my head was, this guy is going to try to grab me, and I'll end up missing. My parents and boyfriend are going to read about me in the paper. I can't believe I was so stupid to walk home by myself at 2:00 a.m. I started to panic. I crossed the street, looking at houses to see if I could find one with lights on, hoping people would be awake, and I could walk up to a house and get in the door before this guy grabbed me. There was a set of traffic lights at the intersection where the parking lot was, and a street ran perpendicular to the street I was walking down, connecting to the parking lot entrance exit. As soon as I crossed the street, the car backed out and pulled up to the lights, sitting there. I assumed he was waiting to see if I turned the corner or went straight. At that time, I had picked out a house about 4 down from where I was and planned to walk in like I belonged there. My heart was racing, and I was still cursing myself for being so foolish. As I crossed the street to go straight, the car turned right and slowly drove down the street, then turned the corner onto another side street. It was then that I could see my place just past the same side street, so I ran as fast as I could, praying that the door wasn't locked. I saw the car parked on the side street, still running but with the headlights off, as I ran past. Thank the gods that our front door wasn't locked, and I managed to get home safely. Just thinking about that night still makes me break out in a sweat and start to shake. I was so terrified that this guy was going to grab me, and that would be the last my family and friends would see of me alive. I still kick myself for not catching his license plate. He drove past me enough times that I should have noticed. My sister claimed someone was coming into her house in the middle of the night. Okay, so this whole thing began maybe 2 months ago at an aunt's party. My sister came up to me and said that she thought someone had been entering her house in the middle of the night. My sister has always been easily scared, so at first I was skeptical. I asked her how she knew someone had been in the house, whether she had actually seen anyone, etc. She told me she hadn't seen anyone, but she knew for a fact someone was in her house. She then went on to explain that she has a satellite box downstairs that streams to her bedroom television. The first time it happened, she said she heard the TV being used, so she turned on her TV and saw that someone was flicking through the channels. I still didn't really believe what she was saying, but she did seem genuinely afraid. She claimed it had been going on for 3 months, on and off. To put her mind at ease, I told her I would stay at her place for a few nights to see if the guy came. I took my younger brother along, just to be safe. In all, we stayed at her place for 4 nights. During those 4 nights, nothing unusual happened. My brother and I were convinced she was going crazy. We decided we had stayed long enough and told her that we had to go home. She became extremely upset about this. I reassured her and told her to call the police the next time it happened. She had called the police once before about the guy, and they turned up to find no one in the house. I said she could call me any time she wanted and left for work. 2 days later, she called me at 11:30 p.m. and claimed he was downstairs in her house right now. I asked her how she knew, and she said he was walking around the house. She was whispering and crying. I knew she wasn't making this up. I could tell from her voice. I called my brother and told him to meet me at her house. I was on the phone with her the entire drive over to her place. I lived 10 minutes away. When I got there, my brother was parked outside. We both went to the back of the house. I was still on the phone with my sister. The first floor of the house was lit solely by the TV in the living room. As we approached the patio door, we saw that a man was sitting on the couch, facing us. We were frozen solid, and my sister noticed that we had gone quiet and started asking what was wrong and if we could see him. I told her to stay quiet and that we had it in hand. I then hung up and called the police to explain the situation. The guy hadn't moved from the couch at all. The TV turned off while we were waiting for the cops, and my brother and I freaked out when it happened. We couldn't see anything downstairs. Then the hallway light turned on, meaning someone was on the stairs. We opened the patio door, ran up the stairs, and caught the guy with his ear to her door. We confronted him and got my sister out of the house. He had a knife in his coat pocket. The cops came maybe 10 minutes later. He could have harmed her if he wanted to, which is outrageous. It turns out the guy was one of our mom's old boyfriends who had lived with us for a while in the 90s. He had always been fond of my sister, but we had never suspected it was him. He hadn't contacted any of us for nearly a decade. My sister has moved back in with my mom and is undergoing therapy to get over what happened. Our former stepfather, as he liked to call himself, was given 3 years in prison. We're doing our best to cut all ties with the man. I live in a tiny town in western Tennessee. When I say tiny, I mean microscopic. It's a nice neighborhood, if a little stereotypically southern. The crime rate is low, everyone knows everyone, and there are lots of churchgoers and pickup trucks. It's not my particular cup of tea as an adult, but overall, it seemed like a very, very safe place to grow up. You walked to school, there was no school bus. The city is so small that you can get from one end to the other in about 20 minutes on foot. It's a big football town. There's not much else to do, really. The biggest points of interest are the church, the football field, and the grocery store. This story happened while I was 16 years old. It was a typical Friday night, and I was home hanging out with my kid brother, who was 9 at the time. We recently had new neighbors move in next door, and their kid, Mason, was his age. They became best friends pretty much immediately. There's always a football game on Friday nights during the season, and the whole town shows up. I had lots of friends there, as did he. I wasn't partial to the games. Once I had seen one, I had seen them all. I would still occasionally walk down to the field and meet up with my buddies to do something after. But that was about the extent of it. The phone rang, and my brother got it first. I'm pretty sure we were playing a video game of some kind. And around this time, I believe it was Super Smash Bros. Melee on the old GameCube. He was intimidatingly good for his age, and we had a nice sibling rivalry going. He always played with Roy, and I played with Marth. These matches were absolute nail-biters. He hung up and told me that Mason was at the game with his parents, and could we pretty please go down and get him. I didn't want to be down there in a huge crowd of sweaty fans, and I told him so. But Lauren, his mom, says he can't walk home without us. He wants to come home and hang out. We can do a 3-person tournament. Come on, Lauren, please. Frustrating. Fine. Okay, it's a 10-minute walk at most, and at least we wouldn't have to stay. We'll go down, grab Mason, and then head back to play some Melee. We headed up our dead-end street on the left and started down the main road. The sports complex is on this road, just at the bottom of a hill. It was about twilight, and from the top of the hill, we could already hear the marching band and the cheering. I didn't see many folks around, but nothing looked unusual. I really didn't expect to see anyone. Pretty much everyone was down at the game. Looking ahead, I could see parked cars lining the street, with a bulk of them right by the turnoff to the sports complex. He was doing the typical kid-brother thing as we walked. Hey, Lauren, did you know owls can turn their heads almost completely around? Hey, Lauren, me and Mason had a shoe throwing contest, and my shoe went so far I almost couldn't see it anymore. Hey, Lauren, look at this flower, it's awesome. At about the halfway mark, I saw a silver SUV pull up across the street, just opposite where we were walking. It sat for about 10, maybe 15 seconds, and then a man got out just as we were passing by, so that he was behind us. He looked to be in his mid-40s. In retrospect, he screamed suspicious man. He had a weasel-like face, was tall and wiry, and had a weird smile sneer. At the time, however, I didn't think twice. Of course, he was just a guy going to the game, probably meeting up with his family. My brother was on my left, and I was on the right, so we kept walking normally. After about 30 seconds or so, I heard shuffling. I turned around reflexively, just to glance at what was going on. This guy was gaining on us. Okay, no big deal. He's probably trying not to miss anything and will probably walk right past. I would have loved to keep a brisker pace myself, but I had my kid brother in tow, and his 9-year-old legs just couldn't handle speed walking. We kept going as usual, but now I had made a mental note. A little more time went by, maybe a minute, and I started thinking, I wonder why he hasn't breezed past us. The guy sure looked like he was in a hurry, so I turned around again. This man was right behind us, and I mean close enough for me to see the creepiest smile sneer I've ever seen on a person's face. Only he wasn't just behind us, he was directly behind my brother. And in my glance back, he had his arms out in front of him. He was reaching for my brother, and almost had a hold of his upper right arm. I caught this guy nearly in mid-snatch. I reached out with my left hand and put it around my brother's back. Probably 5 seconds went by, but it felt like a lot longer than that. After forming an armed barrier, I quickly scanned the street. There was no one else around, no witnesses, no help. I'm only 16. This guy's a lot bigger than me. What am I going to do? I leaned down and said as quietly and calmly as I could, "Come on, Ross, let's get there. I bet I can go faster than you." I started to speed walk, and so did my brother. I had my arm on his back, half pushing him, rushing him along as fast as he could walk. I could see the sports complex. It was just down the hill, about a minute away at most. After about another 30 seconds, I'm not quite sure, the whole thing seemed to go by in slow motion. I turned around again. The guy was speed walking too. He matched our pace to keep right behind my brother, and he was gaining again. Now I really started to panic. He was really after us. There was no other explanation. I didn't know him, and I almost caught him grabbing the kid. Now he was almost in grabbing distance again, picking up speed, and he was smiling. Well, sneering. It was a predatory look. I turned back around and saw we were so close to the stadium, so very close. If we could just get down there a little more, the property would open up, and there would be people everywhere. I had to get down to all those people right now. I tried to sound calm, but I was sure I didn't at that point. "Let's run, Ross. Come on, I'll race you." And we took off running. I was looking more at him than what was ahead of me, trying to keep him in my sight the entire time. He thought it was a game. He smiled and started running his little heart out. I remember feeling a tiny speck of relief. Oh good, he doesn't know he's about to be in danger. And he was pretty fast. He was in it to win it. I saw the entrance to the stadium and thought we had to be home free by now. I turned around and this guy was running. It was one of the scariest moments of my life. I knew at that point, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that this guy was only running to catch us. Well, not us per se, but my brother. He was starting to gain, but he wasn't close enough yet. I went back around and sped up to my maximum speed. And of course, the kid pumped his own legs to the max because he wanted to win a race against his sister so he could brag about it. Once again, I looked directly at him more than the street in front of me to be sure he was still there with me. I heard his thuds on the pavement, and I knew he was all right. My heart was sending electrical currents of fear through the rest of my body. And just as I heard him coming up right behind us, we hit the stadium grounds. It was a sharp left turn, and bam, people. There were people everywhere. It was halftime, and the adults were out in the entrance area smoking and talking. The view of the entranceway, and all the people was obscured by a stone archway marking the stadium grounds. I had never been so happy to see a bunch of sweaty football fans in all my life. The guy came right behind us, and the second he turned the corner after us and saw all the people, he panicked. I could see the surprise and fear in his eyes. I had turned around at that moment to see where he was, and I looked right at him, locking eyes with him in this beautiful moment. He looked around at everyone, looked at me, looked at my brother, and walked away, back the way we had all come. Ross was out of breath, but still nudged me to go and collect Mason. I said, "Give me just a second, man." I peeked around this stone archway and watched this guy walk, not run, back up the street, cross the street, get back into his SUV, and drive away. I think that's when it fully hit me. The very real situation we were just in, and the very real danger. That guy was there too. Get us? Well, not us per se, but my brother. What's more, he probably would have succeeded have we not made it to the stadium. The crowd spooked him, and most likely, that's what saved my brother's life. We found Mason, but I made the whole group wait until the game was over and get a car ride with his folks. No burden on them, we live right next door. I was shaken up for the rest of the night and for a couple of days after. In this kind of town, it's the last place in the world you would think about being snatched. I also have never told anyone. I never told my parents. I never told my brother. He's almost 20 years old now and could probably handle it. But I just never saw a reason to give him a complex about something that happened years ago. I also never told the police, and I have no idea what happened to the guy in the silver SUV. I don't know if he lived around here or far away. I don't know if he's been caught, went to jail, or if he's still out there somewhere. I do know for certain that he was there to kidnap my brother that day. I don't know what kind of disturbing plans he had for him. But then again, I don't care to dwell on it. I don't know if I did the right thing or the wrong thing, or just how close my brother came to whatever plans that guy had in the works. But I don't care to dwell on that either. I can tell you, however, that there was once a time in my life when I meaningfully uttered the phrase, "Thank goodness for sweaty football fans." I am an avid backpacker, and 2 weekends ago, I took my boyfriend on his first backpacking trip. We did a short one night out and back in Oregon's Cascade Range with plans to see Emerald Lake. He's an asthmatic, so I decided to keep it short and light until I knew how strong of a hiker he was. The trail we took started from Cascade Lake Park, which, for those unfamiliar with the area, receives a couple of hundred visitors each weekend, quite busy by backcountry standards. The particular trail we were on, Emerald Lake's Trail, is a popular day hike, but we decided to make it an overnighter. After about 2 hours of hiking, we reached the lower Emerald Lake. We ran into a group of 820-somethings who were planning to camp at the lake, and chatted with them for a bit before continuing to Upper Emerald Lake. The upper lake is about a half-mile past and 300 feet higher than the lower lake, with lovely views overlooking it. Upon arriving, we were the only ones there, along with 3 30-something men, and despite the exposure to high winds, we decided it would be a good place to set up camp. We got a late start to the day, so by the time camp was all set up, it was about 6:00 p.m., and the sun had settled behind the mountains. The last of the day hikers had since left, and we were the only tent set up at the upper lake. It was getting pretty windy and chilly, so we decided to retire to the tent for the night. We ate dinner overlooking the lower lake from our tent, and then zipped ourselves in. Note, with the rainfly covering my tent, there was no way to see outside of it. We stayed up for a bit longer before dozing off. At some point later, who knows how much later, I was awoken by what I thought were heavy winds. After listening for a bit, I decided something alive was out there. Maybe a pika, maybe a ground squirrel, maybe a bear. I woke Alex up because I was a little nervous. After listening for a bit, he agreed the rustling was definitely something other than the wind. We kept as quiet as possible, hoping not to spook it, just in case it turned out to be something larger and stronger than us. We both located and unsheathed our knives without really consulting the other. I guess we were both a little nervous at this point. And then he saw it. oriented toward the left side of the tent from where we were lying. He put his hand over my mouth to tell me to keep hushed and pointed to it. Lo and behold, there was the shadow of a human silhouette being cast upon our tent. It was a full moon night, so it was practically bright as day outside. So bright that you could walk around without a headlamp, no problem. I think this is what allowed the shadow to be created. Anyway, we both stayed as quiet as possible, desperately trying not to alert whoever was outside our tent that we were awake. Knives pointed in their direction. We stayed still for what seemed like an eternity, probably closer to 2 minutes, staring at the shadow as the wind came and went in bursts. Finally it moved, and a hand touched the tent. Now, I don't mean a hand grazed our tent. This person reached their hand out and put enough pressure on the tent to the point that the rainfly depressed into it, and you could see the outline of the hand. And then, after about 10 seconds, the hand was no longer on our tent. The shadow retreated, and we heard some rustling, then nothing other than the wind for the rest of the night. Needless to say, we didn't get a wink of sleep. We didn't even make a pee trip for an hour or so after the incident. Alex practically suffocated me because he was insistent on covering me with most of his body so he could protect me if they came back. Around 7:00 a.m., we finally emerged from the tent. There was zero sign of other campers, but there was one thing. About 2 feet from our tent was a big lighter. It wasn't mine, and it wasn't Alex's, and we were pretty sure that neither of us had seen it the evening before. If we had, one of us would have surely picked it up because, leave no trace and all. We packed up camp just as the first day hikers and trail runners were making their way up to the lake. By the time we got back down to the lower lake, the group we encountered the previous afternoon had already packed up and moved on too. So yep, that's my story. I don't really have a clever ending to tie it all together, but I can say this. It is a uniquely terrifying experience being over 5 miles from the trailhead and many more miles still from civilization when something like this happens. I think I would have driven myself mad if Alex hadn't been there with me that night. But despite our little experience, he has assured me he'll let me take him backpacking again. Probably not to Emerald Lakes, though. This took place after I graduated high school and moved away from my family. I moved up to Montana again. And I say again because I had lived there before and attended college there. Secondly, and very conveniently, my mother had been renting out our old house instead of selling it. Conveniently, the long-standing residents had moved away, and I was awarded the old house. I had to work quite a bit to keep up the payments, but my mother pitched in thankfully. At the beginning of this story, I should mention that I had recently broken up with a girl who had been staying with me in the old house I was renting through my mother. The breakup was messy and dysfunctional, much like the relationship itself. And now the story begins. It was winter break, which meant I would be spending more time indoors than usual. The house felt somewhat lonely, especially with no stable girlfriend around. Also, there were no neighbors nearby. The house was in a densely wooded area a few miles out of town. One late afternoon, soon after I thought the whole breakup ordeal had finally ended, I realized it hadn't. My cell phone started ringing, and ringing from an unknown number. Cliché, I know, so I decided to pick up. It was, of course, my ex. She began going on about how great her new boyfriend was and how awful I had been. It was the kind of talk where you can almost smell the alcohol on their breath through the phone. I actually listened until she handed the phone to her boyfriend, who began sounding oddly threatening. I decided to hang up in the most polite way I could think of, with a "screw you," and to have a nice day. Days later, as my mind started forgetting about the most certainly intoxicated phone call, I was lying on the living room couch watching TV. While lying there, I noticed something unsettling. A person standing outside the window behind me. How did I notice this, you ask? Through the reflection on the TV screen. I didn't move, not an inch. I had no gun, no knife, just my wits and fists. I lay there watching the reflection until the figure eventually moved away. Normally, that wouldn't have spooked me, but considering that the house was remote, it was a red flag. Plus, if someone wanted to talk, they'd knock. I was pretty sure it was her boyfriend. Nothing major came of that, but strange incidents continued, like a car pulling into the driveway, its occupant never getting out, then driving away inconspicuously. It was worrisome, to say the least, but I didn't suspect any real danger. A few days later, late at night, I got another call from an unknown number. It was her asking me to come outside because she wanted to apologize. At the time, I thought, forget it, but still went outside to see what was going on. I opened the door, and it was incredibly dark. I spoke into the phone, "I'm outside. Come around back." With that, I started walking across the snow-covered ground in my just-put-on boots. The motion light flickered on as I crossed the garage and driveway, casting a yellowish tint over the snow. I rounded the garage corner and aimed my phone light toward the road that ran behind my house and connected to the driveway. "I'm here. Where are you?" "In the car." "I see you." I stepped onto the road and saw a car parked a few dozen feet away with the lights dimmed. "So what's this about? I just want to talk." "Come here." I walked around to the passenger side and saw her face through the window. She waved me in, so I got in. She looked at me and said, "Look, I'm sorry. I know I've been difficult lately." "No, it's okay. I really wasn't good to you, so maybe I deserved it." Before she could finish, headlights appeared behind us. I assumed it was her boyfriend, and from her expression, so did she. The car parked, and her boyfriend got out, storming over to my side. He yanked the door open, trying to grab me, but I caught his wrist and got out of the car. "What do you think you're doing with her, huh? We were talking, and I was about to leave." "Liar. You're trying to hook up with her." He looked at me with pure anger before swinging at me and missing. A little scuffle broke out. He swore repeatedly and eventually slipped, yelling, "I'll get you." I stood there as he pulled away. She offered to drive me back, and I invited her inside for the night. It was late, so I suggested she lock her car, and she did. We went upstairs to sleep. Hours later, I awoke to a banging noise from the back door, which was directly below my room. She woke up too, whispering, "Oh my God, I think it's him." I stood up, grabbed my baseball bat from behind some old coats in the closet. She sat up, covering her face with her hands. Without saying a word, I crept down the stairs, making sure the bat didn't hit the walls. The floorboards creaked at the base of the staircase. The sound grew louder, closer, until it was right next to me. I tightened my grip on the bat. and as the sound came directly in front of me, I swung down hard. I hit something, and it collapsed to the floor with a small flash. I turned on the light, and there he was, the boyfriend, lying on the floor. He had fired a shot into the hardwood. My ex came down crying, saying, "I'm so sorry," over and over. I called the police, and within minutes, 4 squad cars and an ambulance arrived. I sat there watching him breathe shallowly on the floor. I'd taken his gun, a 9, and kept the safety on while I waited, shaking my head in disbelief. I explained everything to the officers, and the paramedics took him out on a stretcher. I didn't get to sleep until the afternoon. He ended up in a coma, but eventually recovered, and I'd already filed a restraining order. My ex and I became good friends afterward, and she never saw him again. I thought about moving, but never did. Since then, nothing else has happened. My cat likes to go outside every day. In the morning, he follows us to the door, takes the elevator down with us, and then goes about his day outside until we bring him back home again in the evening. Now, my cat isn't the most punctual guy, so it's pretty common for him to stay out much later in the neighborhood, sometimes well into the night, or for several days if he gets bored. And when he wants to get back inside, the problem is that we're not home, so he just has to wait. My family and I live in an apartment on the first floor, so my cat's solution is to sit under one of our balconies and meow at the top of his lungs to get our attention. When we're home, it works perfectly fine, but when we're not, it's a lot less effective. So our solution was to gently ask our neighbors, who have a key to our apartment, to bring him up, so he doesn't have to wait outside all day. Those who don't have the key sometimes let him inside the building, so he's not literally outside, for example, when it's raining. Our apartment is a bit special because it's bigger than the others, so to get inside, there are 2 ways. When you enter the main hall, take the stairs to the left and open the door that has 2 locks, or use the elevator with a special key that goes directly inside our apartment, and the door only has 1 lock. The cat is used to the second option, and so am I because we're both lazy. However, when the neighbors who don't have the key let him inside the building, he goes up the stairs and waits. Since I usually use the elevator from the parking 2 floors below, I don't see him waiting in the hall. He meows outside the door to get me to open up for him, or my dad, or my mom. Overall, we have our habits with my parents and neighbors, and it works fairly well. Now you know how everything goes with my little guy. Anyway, here's what happened a while ago. My parents love the outdoors very much, so I'm usually left alone on the weekends. Generally, this means taking care of the chores and inviting my friends over so we can have the apartment to ourselves, which is pretty nice. This time I was alone. It was late, around 11:00 p.m., and I was just chilling in the living room before hearing meowing over the sound of the TV. Someone let my cat in the building, and he's waiting outside the door. I took my keys and started opening the first lock. I don't know about other pet owners, but I know my cats meow by heart. It's a kind of rising wail that's very high-pitched and very cute, with a specific rhythm, because I've been hearing it nearly every day for 5 years. So I stopped. The noise isn't what it usually is. It's too deep and just off. This isn't my cat outside my door. and he's the only cat around that knows. He has to wait by the door and scream to be let inside. By that point, I had stopped halfway through opening the door and waited to hear him again, noticing scratching. My cat never scratches that door. At that moment, I was super weirded out by the situation. But the meowing was getting super loud, and I didn't want the neighbors to be woken up, so I continued with my key. But suddenly, I heard another noise that freaked me out, a cough. For the record, I'm not a very cautious person, and in my whole 21 years of living in this apartment, I must have looked in the peephole a total of maybe 5 times. However, a small part of my brain told me to do it that night, and thank God it did. So I let go of my keys and put my eye against the door and saw it, a man standing there, absolutely yelling in front of my door. To say that I was terrified is really an understatement, but my heart stopped. I just stood there petrified for what felt like an hour. I don't really know how long it took for me to move again, but eventually my body just took over, I guess. I did what you'd expect. I ran for my phone, stood in the corner of the living room, and called the police. But by the time they came, there was nobody in front of the door. I can't even remember when the meowing stopped, and they just took my testimony before telling me to be cautious and left. To this day, I still don't know what that meowing guy wanted. I'm not sure I want to know anyway. I also don't know how he got inside the building, since you need a key to access it, and how he knew that I would open the door if he imitated my cat in front of it. At least I will be careful from now on. I had just moved out of my parents' house and in with my very wealthy girlfriend named Rebecca. We were both young and able females just out of high school and eager to taste freedom with some well-deserved love on the side. Together, we found a pretty nice 2-story house that was going for a very good price. It was even in a great part of the city, which was convenient for Rebecca's job at her father's office. We should have known the price was a little too good to be true, but at the time, we naively jumped at the chance in a heartbeat. As we were moving our stuff in, we were immediately greeted by Meredith, our middle-aged next-door neighbor, who was just dying to know all about us the moment we arrived. I still remember her short brown hair that sat upon her head in shambles, which matched her equally colorless clothing. Her formal attire made me feel like I had just walked into a job interview instead of meeting my new neighbor. She insisted on bringing some of her pastry dishes for dinner that night, but as we had made plans to eat out already, we promised her another time. Looking back, I wish we hadn't made that promise. The next day, as Rebecca and I were working on the living room, a happy 3-note knock came at the door. It was Meredith with several small cases of bread and other pastries inside. Before I could make heads or tails of the unexpected arrival, Meredith was already making a beeline to the kitchen, insisting we eat some dinner. I wasn't exactly pleased by this, but Rebecca assured me she had good intentions. So, after whipping up a few sandwiches from the fridge, we sat down at the small kitchen table with her. Boxes and boxes of our unpacked things crowded the kitchen, making for a cramped space. But Meredith didn't even seem to care as she rattled off question after question. It wasn't long until she started talking about the church she was a part of and how she had been going to it for decades. It was fascinating and a little unsettling how she talked about the church. Watching her eyes look up as if she were preaching the direct word of God. It didn't take long for Meredith to ask us to come by the church this coming Sunday. She even gave a sweet smile and said the choir boys they were a fine sight to behold alone. It was at this moment that Rebecca replied that if there were any choir girls there that were as fine as the boys, she definitely would stop by. Immediately, Meredith's big smile transformed into a look of silent shock, then utter disgust. "Oh, I see," she muttered quietly. In what felt like a flash, Meredith picked up her now empty cases and headed straight for the door. It was quite obvious what had offended her, but I still felt the need to go after her. As I called out her name, she spun around, and her narrow stare met my eyes. "This house is cursed." And with that, Meredith smashed one of the glass cases onto the floor and made her way out. As I went to close the door, Meredith was screeching what I think were scriptures from the Bible as she stormed down the sidewalk. As I cleaned the glass, Rebecca was laughing uncontrollably at what had just happened. While Meredith was certainly offline, I didn't see any humor in it like Rebecca did. Just 2 days in, and the neighbor already hated us. It wasn't until 2 months later that we heard from Meredith again. It was nearing Halloween, and I was setting up decorations for the front of the house. Pumpkins, skeletons, the works. As I was pasting some stickers onto the window, I heard a familiar voice come from behind me. "It's not too late, you know." I turned to see Meredith dressed in all black like she was going to a funeral. "The Lord will forgive you and your friend, but you must listen to me." I still felt bad for before and wanted to try rebuilding a healthy relationship with this neighbor, so I asked her what she wanted to say. She apparently needed to bless us and our house, as well as put us on strict religious regimens. I calmly told her that we needed to find alternate, non-religious ways to make things right. Meredith wouldn't even hear it. She threw a small Bible at me, telling me to read the Word of God and that she would be back the next day, then briskly walked back into her house. I, in turn, returned to decorating with no interest in reading the holy book. I didn't even bother telling Rebecca, since I knew she'd just make it worse. The next morning, before Rebecca and I were even awake, we were jolted from our sleep by loud noises coming from the front yard. Rebecca decided to check it out while I still wanted to sleep. It wasn't long before I heard Rebecca yelling curses outside, so I dragged myself out of bed to see what was going on. What I saw was shocking. There were pumpkin and skeleton pieces all over the front yard, ripped orange and black streamers blowing away in the wind, and torn stickers on the front porch. Lo and behold, it was Meredith standing there, as she held streamers and pumpkin pieces in her hands. Rebecca was yelling in her face. Did this woman really destroy all of our decorations? Meredith saw me and demanded to know if I had read the Bible. I couldn't even get a word in. Rebecca was demanding she leave at once, or the police would be called. Meredith, obviously not wanting that, tore off back to her house. It was at this point I realized this was a problem that I didn't want and certainly didn't need. After that, Meredith resorted to putting Bibles on our doorstep every night, and sometimes even preached in front of our house. This was usually met with Rebecca running out and scaring Meredith away. This made me very uneasy and Rebecca especially angry. We tried going to the police, but they seemed reluctant to do anything. They constantly promised to go talk to her, but I don't think they ever did. Part of me thinks it's because they had bigger problems than little old ladies who threw Bibles and glass cases. But another part of me thought mine and Rebecca's sexuality could be a factor as well. I spent numerous nights crying as Rebecca held me. This wasn't the dream we envisioned, living together. Things came to a boil a few days into December. I was just finishing snow shoveling when I found myself being pushed out of the way as Meredith was headed toward my house. I didn't even notice her coming. I demanded to know what she was doing, and she made her intentions clear as day. She was going to bless us, and the house whether we liked it or not. I wasn't having any more of this. No, you may not bless us or our house. Meredith shook her head and said we would thank her eventually. It was then that Rebecca came outside and kept Meredith from going into the house as I called the police. What I didn't notice was that Meredith went for the snow shovel until it was too late. She began trying to smash the living room windows, which I assumed she was doing as a way to get in. However, she only managed to shatter a few small panes before she could do more. Rebecca ripped the shovel out of her hands. With that, Meredith fled to her house, screaming, "Lord, cleanse my soul. Lord, cleanse my soul." Beasts and slander. After that, we decided it was best to move in with Rebecca's family as we looked for a new place to live. Yes, we were doing nothing wrong and could have kept fighting, but we didn't want things to escalate any further with Meredith. We were out by the end of December, but that whole month we didn't see Meredith at all. That is, until we drove away from the house one final time. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Meredith speaking some words to her front window. Was it another verse from the Bible? A death threat? Maybe a moment of clarity, asking for forgiveness? I don't know for sure, but there's one thing I do know, Meredith. Let's not meet again. I managed an art supply shop for a while, and while there, I got to know one of my customers, Gerald. He was a large man in every sense of the word. He towered over the other customers, had wide shoulders, and while he wasn't in shape, he still had hands like bowling balls. Gerald worked as a city bus driver, but was planning to start a company in a South American country. He came to learn more about crafts, so that he could take supplies and knowledge with him for this. Gerald attended classes. Usually he would be alone. Sometimes he would bring his wife, a gorgeous woman also from South America. I thought they were a nice couple, friendly, and thought nothing more of it. Then one day, Gerald came into the store. My employee on duty was busy behind the counter, and Gerald asked for my help looking at books. Our book section was in the back corner, the only section of the store, I might add, that wasn't visible from the front desk. I walked back and turned to ask him what he was looking for when he pinned me to the wall. Again, this is a big man. He professed his love for me and told me that he would leave his wife for me if I said so, and that night he would fly us both to South America to save me from being here. I brushed off the whole thing and somehow got away, and Gerald left the store. A few days later, I was working at the front desk, which was near the window, when I heard some commotion outside. A city bus was sitting there. Now we were on the bus route, but there was no reason for a bus to stop outside. Puzzled, I glanced at the driver. It was Gerald. He saw me looking and drove quickly off. Over the next few days, I'd see the same bus slow down outside. Looking up the bus route, I discovered he was actually taking it a few blocks outside his run to do this, bringing his unwilling passengers along for the ride. The next week, I was training a new employee. We were alone in the store when Gerald walked in, looking like hell. I saw him and, not thinking, ran out the back door, leaving a brand new employee there confused and alone. I walked down to a nearby bookshop and asked to hide in their back room for 15 minutes, then called the shop. My employee, sounding lost and panicked, said that Gerald had left. When I got back, he had left a message for me. He had been fired from his job and his wife left him. This meant there was nothing holding us apart. Soon afterward, Gerald began sitting outside the shop in his car, staring in the window at me. He'd be there sometimes at closing, and I started making sure I was never going out to my car alone. One night, my staff had all left, and I looked out to see Gerald outside. Panicked, I asked a frequent customer to please stay, because my stalker was outside. This customer was into buying tattoo supplies. He was a member of a bike gang and an overall sweet guy. I told him the whole story, and concerned, he walked me out to my car that night. Then he told me that the next time Gerald was outside, I was to give him a call. That weekend, I looked out to see Gerald staring in at me from his car. I got on my cell phone and called my biker friend. A half hour passed, and then suddenly there was the roar of engines outside. Easily 20 motorcycles came pulling up, surrounding Gerald's car. Someone yanked open his door, and I saw heated words exchanged. Gerald was talking animatedly with his hands, and no one looked happy. A second later, he tried to back up, and everyone was back on their motorcycles, following him down the street. An hour later, my biker friend came in and said that I shouldn't expect any more trouble from him. I baked him a few dozen cookies the next week as a thank you, which, rough and tough image aside, no one says no to homemade cookies. A few years back, my family and our neighbor family went on a vacation to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. We had a rental house that was up on stilts to deter floodwaters, so you had to walk up a long set of stairs to get to the door. Anyway, on the first floor of the house was a long hallway. At one end were my neighbors and their young children. At the other end was my sister's room, next to the door to the outside. An important part of this story is that the doorknob to my sister's room was broken. You had to turn it all the way, and then apply a little extra force. It would pop and twist a bit more, opening the door. So to the uninitiated, it seemed like the door might have been locked when it was actually unlocked. One night at about 11:30 p.m., everyone was asleep except for my sister and me. I was probably 11 at the time, and she was about 12. We were just hanging out, playing Game Boy and whatnot. All of a sudden, the doorknob started shaking wildly. Someone was trying to open the door, but very frantically. The sound made us jump, so we asked who it was. Nobody answered, and the doorknob kept jiggling. We called again. This time we were both a little worried. Still no answer. The doorknob was being shaken like crazy. Someone was really trying to get in. We were freaked out, so we started screaming, asking who it was, with no answer, just the door trying to be opened. Now everyone in the house was aware of our doorknob issue. They would have had no trouble getting in, and if they had heard us screaming, they would have identified themselves right away. My sister and I kept yelling for what seemed like a long time, but it was probably only about a minute. The doorknob stopped shaking after about 15 seconds of this, and maybe 30 seconds later, we heard a voice from outside the door. It was our neighbor asking what was wrong. We opened the door, frightened tears, and told them what happened. We checked to see if it was our neighbor kids, but they were fast asleep. Our parents came downstairs to see what the yelling was about too, so it hadn't been them. The door in the hallway next to our room that connected to the outside was unlocked. I'm convinced someone was in our house that night. They came up that long staircase and into the house. Who it was, I'll never know. But they tried frantically to get into a room with screaming kids in it. Thank God for that broken doorknob. I live in New England, a northeastern region of the United States, where the winters are very snowy with long, cold, dark nights and short days. One such night in February, I was alone in my parents' house, located in a safe, quiet suburban neighborhood where the houses are about 100 feet apart. My parents had divorced years before and were still on good terms. So when my mom decided to sell the childhood home, my dad bought it so I could continue living there while in the process of moving. Neither of my parents stayed at the house for a couple of nights, and only my room upstairs had furniture. The rest of the house was mostly empty with boxes scattered about, and the internet had not yet been switched over. I often sat at the far end of the living room and used our neighbor's Wi-Fi. It was fun not having my parents there for a couple of nights, so I stayed up late with my new laptop and surfed the web into the early hours of the morning. During my second night alone, it snowed late into the evening, and I sat in the dark living room on a folding chair with only my laptop screen for light, watching the snow fall quietly outside. The neighborhood was silent, as cars don't usually drive by past 10:00 p.m., and neighbors stay inside to keep warm. At 2:30 a.m., I decided to head to bed and was wrapping up my internet activities for the night when I heard 3 very slow, quiet knocks on the front door, just a few feet away. I immediately closed my laptop, knowing that the bright screen made me visible to the person outside, since the windows weren't covered. I got off my chair and walked very quietly over to the door, kneeling down below a window to listen outside. Frozen with fear, I waited for what was probably about 2 full minutes, when I heard 3 more identical knocks. They were very slow, and would have been too quiet to wake anyone who had been sleeping. I gathered the courage to look outside through the window and saw a dark figure standing very close to the front door, dressed in a black winter coat and black pants. A hood pulled over his head obscured his hair and face, and he stood still with his arms at his sides. I contemplated calling the police, but ultimately decided to continue waiting. I moved back behind the door, away from the window, and after about 2 more minutes passed, I saw the man walking down the walkway past the front of the house, leaving. Suddenly he stopped, turned around, and looked directly at the window through which I watched him. About 15 seconds passed as we stared at each other, but I couldn't see his face under the darkness of his hood. Finally, he turned around and walked down the driveway and down the street. He didn't stop at any other houses, just continued down the street in the falling snow, and I watched him for about 10 minutes until he faded into the darkness. As far as I know, this has not happened since then. I still live in that house and occasionally have nightmares in which the scene replays itself, except that in the dreams, I open the door for him. I had just graduated high school, and my best friend and I were planning to move into an apartment near the university we would be attending in the fall. On our drive to check out an apartment downtown, a car pulled in front of my friend, and we hit it going 50 mph. The seat belt cut the cartilage in my chest, and I couldn't breathe properly for a bit. My friend had jammed her knee into the dashboard. We were both taken to the hospital. I was okay, but my friend's knee was hurt pretty badly. I called my mom to come and pick me up. When she arrived, we walked over to the hospital pharmacy to fill my prescription for muscle relaxers that would help with the pain from the seat belt injury. As soon as we exited the pharmacy with my prescription bottle in my hand, he appeared. He was tall, probably 63, and thin. He was in his 30s and looked like a scrawny John Lennon. He had the round glasses and everything, except he seemed to hunch over a bit. He was a cross between Riff Raff from Rocky Horror Picture Show and John Lennon. "Hey, I know you," he said to me. My mom stared at me, slightly annoyed that I would be known to a man in his 30s. "No, you don't," I said. "Yeah, I do." "What's your name again?" "Melissa," I said. "Not my name." "Yeah, Melissa. I do know you." "Hey, what you got there?" he asked, nodding to the prescription bottle I was carrying. "A bottle of pills." At this point, my mom and I realized the guy was nuts and picked up our pace, nearly running out to our car. He picked up his pace and shuffled after us, nearly reaching the car as we jumped in and sped off. We drove home, talking about the creepy experience. We laughed a bit at how my mom thought I really knew him and was going to ground me. We thought it ended there, and we would never see the guy again. A month passed, and my friend and I moved into an apartment. I had forgotten all about the creepy John Lennon encounter. Then one day, I was walking out of a convenience store and realized a man holding the door for me looked familiar. He stood there with this weird grin. I smiled and walked to my car. "Hey, Melissa," he said to me. I jumped in my car and glared at him. Over the next few weeks, my friends and I started noticing him all the time. He seemed to be everywhere I was. I remember having coffee with some friends on the patio of a local coffee place. He strolled past us, sat at a table nearby, and pretended like he was part of our conversation. My roommate and I left in a hurry. He chased us to our car. Things escalated from there. One day I was at work. I worked at the body shop in the mall, and he showed up at the doorway and just stared in at me. The store manager made him leave. A few days after that, I pulled up to my apartment and spotted what I thought was his car right in front of my building. I parked a block behind and tried to get a good look at him. Sure enough, it was him, just sitting in front of my house. I took off and he chased me. He knew where I lived, where I worked, where I hung out, and who my friends were. And now he was chasing me in my car. I should note here that this happened in 1992. Stalking laws didn't exist. It was an incredibly odd situation to be stalked by a complete stranger. My dad lived rather close to me, so I went to his apartment. There was an underground parking garage, and the door to the building from there needed a code. I drove around and saw that my dad's car wasn't there. His condo was on a one-way street. When I left, the stalker was waiting at the next street and sped up behind me. I drove to a friend's house that was a little ways away. I seemed to have lost the stalker at some point. The friend wasn't home, so I asked her mom if I could hang out there for a bit and call my dad. When I reached him, he said to come to his house immediately. I headed over and still saw no sign of the stalker. I went up to my dad's condo, and he suggested we go drive around to see if we could find the guy's car and at least get a license plate number. That way, we could file a police report. We went to the garage, got in my dad's car, and the automatic door opened. Right then, the stalker's car was driving down the narrow, one-way alley to my dad's garage. I started yelling, "That's him. OMG, that's him, Dad." My dad pulled the golf club from the back seat, jumped out of his car, and ran to the stalker's car, screaming at him to hand over his keys. Meanwhile, the garage door was opening and closing because we were parked right in the middle of the doorway. The stalker was nearly crying. "Don't hurt me, sir. Don't hurt me," he was wailing as he frantically rolled up his window. My dad was an intimidating guy, and I had never seen him so angry. He just kept screaming at the guy to hand over his keys and get out of the car. Finally, the guy gave in. He stepped out and handed my dad his keys. My dad grabbed him by his shirt and yanked him through the doorway to his building. The garage door was still opening and closing. I was frozen. OMG, my dad is going to murder this guy. He's going to kill him and bring out his dead body. I imagined having to go with my dad and bury this guy in a desert somewhere. I moved over to the driver's seat, pulled his car into a parking spot, and waited. I had no idea what to do. Some time passed, and my dad finally emerged with the stalker guy, still alive. He opened the door and told me to get in the back seat. He then tossed the stalker into the passenger seat and walked around to the driver's side. The stalker was strangely calm, flustered, but much calmer than he should have been. My dad pulled out of the garage and started driving. Now the conversation in the car was bizarrely hilarious. "Where are we going, sir? Where are you taking me? I see you like golf. I'm sure in another situation, you and I would be friends." My dad told him to shut up and asked him what the hell he thought he was doing following a teenage girl all over town for weeks on end. "I just like Melissa. She has a nice car and I think she's really pretty," he said, shrugging his shoulders. That was a long 10-minute drive to the police station. My dad dragged him inside and told the cops to charge him with assault. The cops took the stalker dude in the back and then brought us to a little room to take our statement. They explained that there were no laws against following someone. He would have to do something to hurt me before they could do anything. They said that they were sure he was scared as hell and wouldn't be coming around anymore. They gave us a case number and we left. You would think it would be over, right? I went home and filled my roommate in on everything that happened. A few friends came over, and I was sitting outside with a couple of them. We were talking about everything with the guy and how scary it all was. I'll never forget the one comment from a friend. "Isn't some part of you flattered that a stranger would go to all that trouble?" I lost it. "Are you kidding me? Flattered? The man is not sane, and I am in danger. There is nothing flattering about any of this." I looked up just in time to see the stalker drive right past my house. Now, this was only the first 3 to 4 months. After the situation with my dad, his appearances slowed, but definitely did not stop. He was still around, but kept more of a distance. The end of the school year came, and my roommate was moving to Seattle. This was the summer of 1992. Still no stalking laws were in place. I moved out on my own. One afternoon, I took my dog out for a walk. As soon as I stepped off the porch, I saw him. His car was parked in front of my apartment, and he waved. I ran inside and called the police. I was told they couldn't do anything. I explained what happened with my dad and how long it had been going on. "Sorry, ma'am. We'll make note of it, but we can't come out." I watched from my front window as he stared into my apartment. It progressed from there. He started coming to my work. He would sit outside of my house, across the street on my neighbor's grass. He was everywhere. It was maddening. I couldn't even take my dog outside. I was constantly in fear. He never threatened me or anything. He rarely said a word. He was just always there. One morning I was leaving for work, and there he was again, walking in the street in front of my house. I became so angry. I screeched my Jeep out of my driveway and nearly knocked him over. I started screaming out my window for him to leave me alone. I wanted nothing to do with him. He smiled, put his hands in his pockets, and strolled away with a skipping to his step. When I got home that night, he was back. There was nothing I could do or say to make it stop. I knew the danger I was in, but I was helpless. It went like this for another year. He would drop away for a few months, then reappear and start up again. I had 25 case numbers of paper hanging on my fridge. Each time I called the police, that's all they would give me. I was starting to go a little mad. I was afraid all the time. The mall where I worked issued a trespass order to him, so he couldn't go inside. That was my safe place. Then he disappeared. It had been 6 months since I had seen him. One day my phone rang. It was a detective who asked if he could meet with me regarding the stalker. His name was Michael. I met him at his office, and he said how sorry he was that my situation had been going on for so long. He brought out a file that was at least 3 inches thick. He told me how dangerous this guy was. He had been charged with domestic violence. He was married and had 2 little kids kidnapping. And he was a long-time patient of the local mental health clinic. The detective said he couldn't believe how lucky I was, that he never tried to hurt me. Apparently, the guy had been arrested for an assault and had been in jail for a period of time. That is how the detective found out about me. He wanted to present my case to the district attorney. New laws were being passed, and they thought my case could be prosecuted. Immediately after that meeting, I moved into a new building with tight security. The guy was out of jail, and I didn't want to take any chances. Within 2 months, he found me again. I contacted the detective, and he said he was trying to get the district attorney to take it on, but there were no guarantees. I couldn't take it anymore. I moved home to my mom's house, 40 miles away. I stayed there a year, and during that time, I met my now husband. We decided to move out into a house downtown. My husband knew all about this stalker situation. Luckily, I hadn't seen him in well over a year. One night we were playing pool at a bar, and who walks in? Michael the stalker. He put his hands in the air as soon as he saw me, and started walking backward out of the bar. I'm leaving. I'm leaving. I didn't know you were here. I'm sorry. I'm leaving. I'm leaving. Don't call the police. I was on edge again for weeks, but he never showed up again. I don't know what happened or why he got so panicked when he saw me that night. I questioned my dad heavily for years after it all happened. Come on, Dad. You found him and threatened him or something, didn't you? Admit it, he always just laughed and told me I thought he was more of a superhero than he was. 10 years passed, and my husband and I moved a few times. We were back in the same neighborhood I lived in when all the stalking took place. I had 2 little kids now. We were at the grocery store, and there he was. I panicked at the thought of him seeing me. He seemed completely out of it, like someone with a lobotomy. He was zombie walking and didn't even notice me. And that was the last time I ever saw him. So to start, I'm a transgender woman. I'm single, and I make my status as trans very clear on all my dating profiles, except dating fish, because they consider that to be talking about sex, and they will straight up ban you. So I state instead that I'm a huge proponent of trans rights. One day, a guy messages me. He lives about an hour away and is kind of cute in a mildly creepy way, like something seems a little off about him. But people can't help how they look, so I give him a chance, just like I would want. I discover he's a smoker, but he says he's trying hard to quit and only does it when he's really stressed or upset. We have a nice conversation, and finally he asks for my number. Without thinking about it, I give him the number, but tell him I'm getting ready for my evening classes, so I'll be slow to respond. A few minutes go by and I get a message. Hi, it's username from Dating Fish. Now, usually, I send a standard quick message. Hi, it's Ellie. Just to be clear, since my profile might be a little vague, I'm a transgender woman. I know that's not everyone's cup of tea, so if you're not interested, I can completely understand. About 20% of the time, the guy isn't interested and gets rude, needing to be blocked, while the other 80% is split between immediate inappropriate questions, casual acceptance, or dead silence. But like I said, I was getting ready to go to class, so I hadn't sent the message yet. A few minutes go by, and I'm about to text him my standard reply when I get another text. Who is full dead name, and why is he paying your cell phone bill? Me. Where did you even get that name? Him. Answer the question. Who is he? Honestly stunned at this point. And I realize he must have paid one of those sketchy websites that offer personal info for a fee. Well, if you must know, I'm transgender, and that used to be my name. I was about to tell you when you pulled that stunt. Please do us both a favor and lose my number. That's incredibly invasive, and I don't want to talk to you anymore. Do you still live at my address at the time in Hometown? I'm coming to see you so we can talk about this in person. Me lying. No, I moved a few months ago, and I'm getting ready to head out like I said. You need to leave me alone. Don't contact me again. Him. Since you have something to hide, I'm going to run a full background check on you. You lied to me, and I don't appreciate that. Me. I'm sending screen caps of this conversation, your Dating Fish profile, and your photos to my two best friends who work in law enforcement in your town and my ex-boyfriend, who I'm still on good terms with, who works for the local sheriff's office. Don't text me again. I didn't hear anything else from him for a few weeks. I made sure my doors and windows were locked, and my law enforcement friends and ex would check up on me from time to time. Eventually, it just became one of those weird things that makes you laugh uneasily. Then one day, I thought I saw him at the local grocery store, same dark hair, thin glasses frames, and just a creepy guy staring at me, watching me as I shopped. I texted my ex about it. As an upswing on things, my ex and I got back together in a casual sort of way, and he stayed the night a few times a month, off and on. One night while I was alone, I kept getting this weird feeling and smelling smoke. I lived in a little apartment complex that had 3 separate apartments sharing walls, but no plumbing or air ducts. I don't smoke, and I'm very sensitive to the smell thanks to asthma. The apartment had a wall AC, so I turned it off since it was apparently pulling air in from a neighbor's guest who must have been chain smoking. I thought I had an ASL video due the next morning, so I was up all night practicing and recording the video, signing the same story over and over again until it was almost a dance rather than narration. A couple of times, I had to restart the video because my cat was going nuts. Finally, around 7:00 a.m., I had the video finished and sent in, and I was ready for bed. I double-checked that all the doors and windows were locked, set an alarm, and went to sleep. I woke up and got ready for school, running a bit late and having to hurry. I noticed something weird by the door, but I didn't have time to stop and register it. Classes went smoothly. I got an A on my ASL video, and I stopped for groceries on my way home from class. As I got home, I saw what had been bugging me. Each apartment had a small garden on each side of the porch. Mine was nothing but gravel and pavers the previous tenant had put in, but it was tidy, except for a pile of cigarette butts that looked like someone had dumped their car ashtray in my garden. There was no other trash, just that pile right in front of my bedroom window. I didn't think anything about it at first, and just got a broom and dustpan to sweep it up. As I was doing it, my neighbor, an old man, came out and asked if my boyfriend ever got a hold of me. I asked him what he meant. He told me there was a young man waiting for me on my front porch off and on for a few hours last night, and that he'd seen the guy around before and thought he was my boyfriend. I asked what he looked like. Dark hair, thin glasses, chain smoking. I texted my on-again, off-again ex, and the cops took statements while I gave them the screenshots. I moved out of state a few weeks later for unrelated reasons, and have legally changed my name since, with closed records. I don't give guys my number anymore. Ladies and my fellow queer family, use a texting app until you get to know someone, because, for about $5, creeps can get everything from your number. I was 8 years old when we first moved into the house on the edge of the forest. My parents had their doubts about buying a house with a backyard bordered by forest. They worried about wild animals getting into our bins or hurting our dogs, and they feared one of us might wander too far into the trees and get lost. But it was cheap. My dad liked the seclusion. My mom loved the house itself, and my siblings and I were excited about playing in the backyard and exploring the forest. Our first sign that something wasn't right was that our dogs were absolutely terrified of the forest. They never ventured in for any reason. If a toy they'd been playing with ended up past the tree line, they would refuse to retrieve it. And when one of us went in, they would pace anxiously until we returned. Occasionally, we noticed the dogs staring at a spot in the forest with obvious distress, sometimes growling or barking, but we could never see anything there. My brother once carried one of the dogs into the trees to show her there was nothing to fear, but she wriggled out of his grip and sprinted into the house in a panic. If we were in the backyard as it got dark, we sometimes heard noises like someone walking through the forest, sticks crunching underfoot, branches being pushed aside. If we called out, there was no response, but if we shined a flashlight, we would occasionally catch a glimpse, for just a split second, of something that we could swear looked like a person walking around in the dark. My parents quickly banned us from entering the forest after dark, and even during the day, we weren't allowed to go out of sight of the house. My sister's bedroom window looked out over the backyard and the forest beyond. She remembers one night looking out and seeing a shadowy figure standing right at the edge of the backyard. She says there was something off about it, like it wasn't quite standing on the ground. It was a little too tall to be a person, and it looked slightly distorted. She was convinced it was staring at her. She called for our dad, saying there was a man in the yard staring through her window. And when he ran outside to chase off whoever it was, she continued watching the figure. It didn't move away, but when the light from our dad's flashlight passed over it, it suddenly just wasn't there anymore. We regularly heard knocking at the back door at night, with no one there. Our parents thought it was teenagers playing pranks, and eventually stopped bothering to open the door. But one rainy night, the knocking was persistent and agitated. My mom pointed out that someone might need shelter from the heavy rain outside, but when she opened the door, not only was there no one there, but there were no wet footprints on the porch. The knocking continued the whole time we lived there, occurring several times in a few weeks, then stopping for months before starting up again. My parents eventually installed a security camera, but it never showed anyone at the door. The camera wasn't entirely useless, though. About 3 years into living there, my brother started having night terrors and sleepwalking. Whenever he went sleepwalking, he would head out the back door, walking toward the forest. My mom, being a light sleeper, would hear the door open and rush out to get him before he reached the trees. After the third or fourth time it happened, my brother asked to see the camera footage, wanting to see how he looked while sleepwalking, thinking it might be funny. The footage showed him walking onto the porch, pausing as if listening to something, and shaking his head before reluctantly walking forward, as if being pulled or forcefully guided by something. One evening, my dad was in the backyard when he heard my sister calling him from the forest, sounding distressed. Thinking she'd gone exploring and hurt herself, he ran in, calling out to her, but he quickly realized it was too dark to see, and he couldn't tell where her voice was coming from. He told her to stay where she was while he grabbed a flashlight. When he ran back into the house, he found my sister inside, safe and completely unaware of what had happened. At the time, my dad hadn't told us about hearing my sister's voice in the forest. Some months later, when I heard my mom's voice coming from the forest while I was outside with the dogs, I didn't question it, despite the fact I'd seen her inside recently. My mom was calling me, saying she'd gotten her sweater caught in some branches and needed help. As I started walking in, the dogs began barking, alerting my dad, who saw me through the window. He came outside, called out, and I replied that I was just helping Mom. He yelled back that Mom was inside and told me to run back to the house as fast as I could, which I did. After this, my parents had a fence built around the backyard and started looking for a new place. In the time between the fence being built and our move, things got worse. We heard knocking at the door more frequently, along with tapping on the windows, as if someone was walking the perimeter of the house, testing each window. We often heard scratching and scraping on the fence and voices beyond it. My brother's night terrors became more frequent. One night my mom didn't hear the door open, and my brother woke up standing at the fence, staring into the forest with the dogs barking at him. On the last morning we spent there, less than 4 years after we moved in, we found the back door fully open. The security camera footage showed it slowly swinging open on its own. Since moving out, my brother's sleepwalking has stopped, though he still experiences night terrors and suffers from severe anxiety. A few nights ago, he called me out of the blue. After a bit of small talk, he asked if I thought the door being open that final night meant that whatever was out there finally got in. He tried to make light of it, saying he was getting into the Halloween spirit and joking about how maybe we should all get exorcised, just in case something latched onto us years ago. But I think he's deeply bothered by everything that happened. I know I still am. I still get nervous around dark wooded areas. I don't know what was out there in the forest behind our house at night, but I get the feeling that, given the chance, it would have swallowed us whole. You made it to the end of the stories. That means it's the perfect time to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you haven't already, leave a like and drop a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have a great time relaxing, and good night.